Crimson Fox here, and today I would like to go over some of my beliefs and advice on being a storyteller. I have been role-playing since roughly the age of 7. My very first role-playing games were Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The other things I did in role-playing, for instance, Choose Your Own Adventure books, Lone Wolf, Grail Quest, fighting fantasy books. I had a variety of influences in my early years. I've done everything from anime-based games like Dominion Tank Police, Tenchi Muyo, Sailor Moon, to World of Darkness, to historical narratives dealing with World War II, King Henry VIII, the Italian Renaissance, to sci-fi things like Star Trek and Shadowrun, and to things like Call of Cthulhu and zombie-esque post-apocalyptic games. And I've dealt with a lot of different subject matter over the years. And these are simply my thoughts on storytelling. And storytelling is a very personal thing. Not everyone's going to agree with the best way to storytell. These are just some of my, thoughts. 1, be prepared. If it's a historical era, for instance, research your era. Watch documentaries. When I was running Ancient Egypt, for instance, I must have watched like 10 documentaries on Ancient Egypt, hours and hours of material, so that I can know that era very, very well. If you think that your job ends when a session ends, you're wrong. From that moment till next week's session, you must dedicate part of your time to note-taking and learning and studying characters and portraying the story the best you can. If you're not prepared as a storyteller and you just are going to make it up each week, don't waste anybody's time. You can get away with improvisation to a degree for a period of time, but a smart player will take notes and they'll eventually trip you up if you're not diligent in your notes. And also there should be a degree of central planning, so to speak, when it comes to role-playing anyway, and planning your sessions. You should know kind of what you want to accomplish and, what the scenarios you're going to put people through are. And the more work you can do ahead of time, the more time you can spend going through the session rather than looking things up like monsters and everything else. Some helpful tips for this, by the way, dungeon masters who want to play. Some time-saving tips for your dungeons. Have all your monsters planned out in your dungeons unless you're doing the old school, random monster rolls and whatnot. And roll all your treasures out the gate. Get all that done. Do not waste in-session time rolling your treasures. Get it all out of the way. All of it. And that way you can spend more time on your actual story and less time waiting. And what I mean by that is having your players wait because you're having to roll treasures and you're having to do all these little things. Have that stuff all planned out. The other thing is know what your, like for D&D in particular, know what your spells do, and, any type of preparation you have in any game, from Dungeons & Dragons to Call of Cthulhu, is to know as much about the rules as you can, but to not be so dogmatic that you're not willing to bend them once in a while if it's for the greater benefit of the story and the greater benefit of your players. So be prepared. Players are going to throw curveballs at you. Players are going to do some things that you didn't expect. And a storyteller that sits there and doesn't have any adaptability whatsoever, because obviously you have what you want to get done and you want to convey in your story in your session, but then you have got to allow some free will among your players, and if you don't, then they're not going to want to play. So be prepared. Secondly, groups. All right, I'm just going to come out and say this. Toxic players, I don't want them in my group. I just don't. You have players that are rules lawyers. You have players that are power gamers. You have players who spend their entire time trying to make out with their girlfriend rather than pay attention to your story, or who are so argumentative that you spend an hour and a half arguing with them. I don't even let those people into my group. And I highly suggest you don't either. And I know what some of you are going to say. Well, I don't know where I'm going to get other players. Believe me, there are communities of role players. You can find good players. Go to your local gaming store or go online. You can run games over Skype or Discord, or, you can have an internet medium. I was in a Discord game, for instance, where we had a player from overseas who would literally show up at our gaming session. I'm sorry, not Discord, but Skype. And he'd show up on the gaming session that way. And I played that for a little bit. But there are a lot of mediums to get new players. Do not put up with absolutely atrocious behavior. If someone is lessening the fun of the game for you and for your group, they should go. And if they're really your friend, and then they should understand that, especially after you've told them time and time again. If they have, problems, for instance, other problems that can crop up in groups are just drug problems, drinking problems, because, you have all kinds of groups. Shout out to the people who are, your stoner, gamers or whatever it may be. If that ends up being a problem to where it destroys your story and destroys your session, then maybe you shouldn't be doing those things. And maybe you should be focusing on the story to the exclusion of those things. And maybe you shouldn't allow your players to, drink a fifth of vodka and sit around the table. But disruptions can absolutely kill your time for running a game. And also consider the audience. Not everyone's going to be interested in every single type of game you run. A good group will be able to power through subject matter even if they think that they won't be interested in it. They can find something to enjoy out of it. But not every player is going to want to play every game. If they decide to drop out for this game or that game, don't take it personally. It's just they can't get into it. But consider what your group's like, and try to work with players. But the players aren't there to run the game. You are. You are the final arbiter, and you need to remember that when you run your games. You're the final arbiter. You are the person that everybody looks to make the call. And make it. And don't feel nervous about making the call. But at the same time, if they want to talk to you off to the side about it, you should allow them to. But you can hold firm if you need to. But toxic players, man, okay, in my opinion, get rid of them. They're not conducive to a story. Conducive, my bad. Then they don't need to be there. Thirdly, my thoughts about role-playing itself. As a storyteller, you should get character inspiration from movies and books and other things. Do your best to act as much as the character as you can when you're role-playing. People are here to see you act to an extent. Role-playing has to do with acting to an extent. And good STs that can act kind of convey emotions better to their players. No one wants to show up at a role-playing session and have that person who goes, "You see the dragon. It is big. It flies around. It burns the village. It flies off. I'm going to continue speaking this monotone and be as undetailed as possible the entire game. I am Ben Stein from a Clear Eyes commercial." No offense to Ben Stein. You need to use description. If you can't describe it, your players can't visualize it in their minds. And sometimes it's okay to use visuals for your players. Like, if you want to pop on YouTube and show them a clip from something because that's what you have going on in your game, don't feel frightened to do that. It's worth it. And maybe even prepare some clips and prepare some music. And if you really want to get into your game, maybe you want to wear a robe if you're the wizard or whatnot, and have a staff with you. Gaming props are cool, you know, like, feel free to do those things and get into it. But you have got to make the story come alive. If you don't, then no one's going to want to play. No one's going to want to game with you. You know, sometimes when I play with my players, for instance, I use body language even. You know, quirk an eyebrow, this type of thing. Use a different voice. You know, these are all good things because part of role-playing is certainly character acting. Now, I know that this next statement I'm going to make will have some storytellers up in arms. And you know what? Fine. Believe what you want about role-playing. I'm not here to critique all the different storytelling methods there are. I do what I do. I've always believed that storytelling is 75% story, 25% rules. Rules are important. I don't dispute that. But if your story's not interesting, no one is going to want to play. If it's not engaging, no one is going to want to play. If the character NPCs and everything else aren't amusing and fun to game with, no one is going to want to play. And your dogmatic approach to the rules is going to just put everybody off, and no one's going to show up to your group. You know, sometimes you got to be willing to let certain things go for the betterment of the story. I would be lying if I said I hadn't fudged a dice roll here and there over the years. Just don't make them depend upon it, as I've said. But when you're so dogmatic about the technical aspects of your game that you forget the entire reason you're there, which is to tell a good story, well, the best that you're probably going to ever be is mediocre, in my opinion. If people wanted to show up to listen to you read a rule book, they would. They're not here for that. They're here for the story. As I have said, I hope that this video helps people to an extent. If you like me to talk about role-playing stuff and there's a particular topic you want me to talk about in my experience of being a dungeon master, a storyteller, a game master, a narrator, you know, whatever it may be, whatever you're calling it these days, ask in the comments below, and I will address whatever issue you want me to address in role-playing. Thank you very much. This is Crimson Fox, signing off.